In many RPGs, enemies or bosses become stronger when their health reaches certain thresholds. In addition, they often gain new abilities and variations that can provide more of a challenge by changing how you approach the fight. In Monster Hunter, the monsters also utilize a similar design through the mechanic known as Rage, which grants monsters various effects during combat. My name is Monster Hunter, and Zinogre is the only monster in the mainline games that cannot enrage unless it is in its supercharged state. And no, I'm not talking about World. In today's video, I'll be covering Rage and how monsters benefit from it. A monster will enrage after receiving a certain amount of damage while in base state. Base is the normal, unaltered state. All monsters have attacks, behavior, and mechanics that are dependent on their current state. Rage is an altered state where they have increased damage, move faster, gain access to new attacks and combos, have their base mechanics altered, and interact differently with items. The damage threshold, duration, and stat changes vary between each monster and quest rank. For instance, in Monster Hunter Rise, the quest Dust Devil Despot features Diablos as the main target. Due to it being G rank, Diablos must receive 1400 damage in order to enrage. The bonus stats don't change, so the enrage will last for 90 seconds, and it earns a 5% boost to speed, 20% boost to its damage, and takes 10% increased damage from players. A monster's move pool expands when enraged, allowing for previously mundane attacks to become more dangerous by changing their properties or linking them in combos. By changing the performance of an attack, players are more likely to be caught off guard, especially if it's their first time, which will alter the response to said attack or combo. Some of these may try to force you into certain scenarios or punish you for reacting earlier than you should. Not to mention the use of new attacks exclusive to Rage that may be more difficult to deal with. Good examples for enraged attacks and combos are Rathian and Daimyo Hermitaur. Rathian's attacks are excellent for beginners to learn fundamentals for system mechanics and monster behavior, without being too easy or too difficult. The conditions for her attacks are easily telegraphed, even when she's enraged. In base form, she can shoot a fireball, charge at the player, and use her signature tail flip. These are easily recognized attacks that can be avoided by simply getting out of the way. When enraged, these attacks are still used to a lesser degree, but you will see different variations. She is more likely to use a super fireball, which sees her reeling back as she breathes in and unleashes it. This can catch you if you're unprepared or trying to close the gap she creates, as the width of the explosion is quite large. Old Rathian's super fireball will explode at the point of impact and cause 3 additional explosions unless the attack directly hits something. One of her more frustrating attacks is her charge, which gets a variation as well. In base, she just runs at the player and attempts to bite them. When enraged, she'll still attempt to charge the player depending on how far you are from her. On the other hand, she uses a triple charge, and it is exactly how it sounds. The problem with this attack is that she makes it harder to hit her safely, and also wastes your time by forcing you to respect the attack and get out of the way, or taking a pot shot when necessary. Lastly, her signature tail flip is turned into a combo. While she does telegraph the first attack, she can use more than one follow-up. In current games, she prefers to fly around the player before doing her flip. In addition to this tail slap, she can also use a dive attack as a follow-up instead. All of these attacks serve to prevent you from exploiting her opening until she is properly done with her attack strings. Daimyo Hermitaur, on the other hand, doesn't have as much nuance to its attacks and combos as Rathian, but it's worth mentioning as it's easier to recognize the conditions that create them. Its base form attack rotations consist of sidewalking claw swipes, double claw push, water stream, crab hug, butt slam, iron wall, and digging chains. Like other monsters, it sees improvements to its attacks and combos during Rage. Its water stream attack can be used while strafing. The way to identify whether it will strafe or not is the position of the claws. When they're facing down, it will stand still, and when they're raised, it will strafe. Regardless of its current state, if you're standing too close during the startup, it will knock you on your butt. This matters more when it's enraged, as it can more easily spray you while you're recovering. Its crab hug attack is significantly faster as a result of the Enrage, but it's still heavily telegraphed and therefore easier to dodge. However, the claw push attack will set this attack up for it. If you get hit while in Enrage, it will immediately follow up with the crab hug. The beautiful simplicity of Daimyo Hermitaur is that its attacks aren't necessarily big, devastating displays, but instead a series of attacks that punish you for not respecting what it's capable of through forcing conditions. All in all, enraged attacks are altered in a way to change how you approach and solve these problems, and punishes those who are too eager or lacking in knowledge. The mechanics of a monster, however they may use them, not only helps them in battle, but also what differentiates them from other monsters. Arzuros, Lagombi, and Volvidon are all monsters that share the same skeleton and similar attacks, but their unique mechanics are what sets them apart. Arzuros can pin the player, Lagombi can slide and throw snowballs, and Volvidon can apply stench and paralysis. This isn't exclusive to offensive capabilities either, as some monsters' rage can provide defensive changes like those seen in the altered hit zone values from Esmena's skin softening, or Basarios reducing total damage by 10%. The example monsters for offensive mechanics are Brachydios and Shagaru Magala, and the defensive changes are Kirin and Valstrax. Offensive mechanics are features primarily used to deal damage to the player, whether it involves coming into contact with them or not. Brachydios' unique feature is its ability to produce slime mold that it applies to its horn and forelegs. In base state, this slime can be stuck to the ground after certain attacks, where it will then explode after a short period of time. This isn't as difficult to deal with, as Brachydios' speed is manageable and the ground slime is less likely to affect you. Where Brachydios becomes lethal is in its rage state, which is indicated by the slime on its body changing color from green to yellow. The attacks that left slime on the ground in its base state will now instantly explode instead. Now that doesn't mean that all attacks don't apply slime to the ground, but it hardly matters when everything is exploding. This is incredibly difficult to handle as its speed is higher and the range of the explosions are quite large. The properties of these attacks force you to alter how you engage with Brachy. For instance, Brachydios' ground punch from either hand can be evaded by simply evading to the opposite foreleg. This is not possible during rage, as the explosion can still hit you if you backstep or if you move to the opposite foreleg. A better solution is to move toward Brachy and try to get behind it, but even the best solution for non-guard weapons is still quite dangerous. Shagaru Magala's unique mechanic is the Frenzy, and its control of the Frenzy virus is on full display in its combat both passive and actively. Certain actions can create a small interactive zone on the ground that inflicts Frenzy virus when a player makes contact. For those inflicted with Frenzy, the build-up rate is sped up, and those who failed to fight off the Frenzy have their health swiftly drained. Its base state plays similar to an enraged Gormagala, with simplistic physical and enraged attacks. Now immediately upon becoming enraged, the area becomes a minefield. Small, explosive blots of Frenzy virus will appear either randomly or targeted and can accompany certain attacks as well. The encounter is now intensified as Shagaru's enraged attacks and combos are paired with rogue mines. This makes it difficult to fully commit to certain actions like a full charge slash, and even harder to punish what little openings are available. Defensive mechanics, like those I covered in my part interaction video, serve to protect the monster in various ways that can range from lowering the overall damage to the monster or altering its values. Kirin is the smallest Elder Dragon and has one true weak point, that being its horn. While you want to focus the horn, you can strike its body, forelegs, and hind legs with varying results depending on your sharpness. You are incentivized to strike the head, but it isn't the end of the world if you miss. Now it is the end of the world when it enrages though, as the body and hind legs become incredibly tough, so much so that even purple weapons can bounce. This forces your positioning and attacks to become more precise in order to avoid deflecting off its hide, which could potentially lead to any number of terrible events. Valstrax is a monster that is incredibly deceptive in its design, as it is a jet falcon with dragon element who has a high elemental weakness for every other element. Before Hunter's Notes and online databases, players had to see the armor's elemental resistances to figure out what said monster was weak to. However, Even now, the Hunter's notes are a sham as they show the weaknesses of the monster in its base state. As you can see, it sure does say that it's weak to every other element, but what people don't know is that when it enrages, it completely sheds these weaknesses, save for a few body parts. While this wouldn't normally affect something like Greatsword, which focuses heavily on raw damage even if the tree has elements, weapons that rely on element like dual blades are absolutely terrified. There goes a 95% of their damage output and as a result, a large portion of your time. Valstrax isn't necessarily killing you by way of these elemental values changing, but the slow, determined grind of having to hit certain parts to maximize your damage can lead to scenarios that aren't as pleasing to the player. A monster's mechanics changing can adversely affect how you manage the situation during your prep and on the field. There are numerous items in Monster Hunter, from barrel bombs destroying the internal machinations of a Nibblesnarf, to the sonic bomb delivering an MRI machine directly into the eardrums of a Lagombi. The various items found or crafted can provide a much needed edge during combat even if the use is generic. Though what may have an effect on some monsters can be completely nullified by their current state. Non-lethal bombs and traps may or may not have an effect on a monster once it enrages. Good example monsters for bombs are Kecha Wacha and Diablos, and for traps, Nargacuga and Rajang. Non-lethal bombs are flash bombs and sonic bombs, and certain monsters interact with these differently. Flash bombs can knock airborne monsters out of the sky, while sonic bombs can force some tunneling monsters to emerge. While that may be the traditional use for these items, sometimes monsters can ignore them. Kecha Wacha is a fanged beast that looks like a tapir mixed with a monkey of some sort. You can flash Kecha, but another interaction this monster has is from sonic bombs. When it is perched on climbable terrain, a sonic bomb will topple it. The unique mechanic of these monsters is their enraged state, which sees their large ears cover their face. Once covered, neither flash bombs or sonic bombs have an effect, providing it free range to carry out its swinging behavior. Diablos is similar, as it digs in the ground as its most common form of attack. Its base state allows for it to be knocked out of the ground by a sonic bomb across every species. Once enraged, sonic bombs no longer have an effect. The only game that this is not true in is World. Traps are meant to temporarily hold a monster with animations that differ depending on the type of trap. Pitfall traps put monsters into an animation similar to that of tunnelers getting sonic bombed, while shock traps imitate paralysis. Some monsters are either downright immune to traps, like a supercharged Zenogre ignoring shock traps, or require special conditions to be met before they can be trapped. Nargacuga can be trapped by both pitfall and shock traps, but it is immune to pitfall traps while in base form. When stepping into one, it simply jumps out and the trap is then destroyed. This is true throughout every species. Only when it is enraged will it be susceptible to pitfall traps. Rajang flips this on his head by not allowing shock traps to affect it while it's enraged, and more specifically during its altered state. This was added in Iceborne and has stayed as a feature in Rise. Though in games prior, Rajang could be affected by shock traps regardless of its current state. While items can help with the hunt, when you use them can be narrowed down when applying the aspect of rage. In short, Enrage can affect the hunt more than just increase damage and speed by altering attacks, mechanics, and item interactions. Having monsters enrage is an interesting feature to me as it doesn't just allow some monsters to remain pushovers. Yes, there's always going to be monsters like Arzuros who can't defend themselves as well as Rajang can, but for your current equipment it may prove different. I avoided speaking about monsters and their super states because that in and of itself is enough for a whole video, which funnily enough, is probably going to be the next one. So remember, Zenogre is the only monster in the mainline games that cannot enrage unless it's in its supercharged state. And I'm not talking about World. Until next time.